I want you to close your eyes for a second. Imagine this scenario. It's a Tuesday night. It's raining outside. You're sitting in your bedroom. Maybe you're in your flannel pajamas, the ones with the holes in the knees.
Hmm.
You have your laptop open. The screen is the only light in the room. And you finally hit export on a track you've been tweaking for like 6 hours. You upload it to SoundCloud, or maybe it's a video you post to TikTok. You close the laptop, you brush your teeth, you go to sleep.
The calm before the storm.
Exactly. You wake up Wednesday morning, you roll over, grab your phone, and it is absolutely melting. You can't even unlock it. You've gone viral.
Wow.
The notifications are just a blur.
Wow.
By lunch, you have emails from managers. By Friday, you are sitting in a glass-walled boardroom in Los Angeles, signing a deal with a major label. By next month, you're on a tour bus in Europe. It is the ultimate creative fantasy, isn't it?
It is.
It's the concept of winning the lottery,
Yeah.
but for your career.
It is the dream. It's the narrative we are sold by every movie, every biopic, and, every social media feed. It is also, without a doubt, the single most dangerous myth in the entire entertainment industry.
Dangerous.
And honestly, it's a myth that I think destroys more careers than it creates.
Dangerous feels like a heavy word for a daydream. I mean, we all want the winning ticket.
Yeah.
But you're saying this belief system, the viral Tuesday, the overnight success, is actually toxic.
I don't think toxic is strong enough. I'd call it catastrophic, because that fantasy creates a completely false expectation of time. It ignores what DGS Music in the research stack we have today calls the invisible work.
The invisible work.
Yeah. If you look at the materials we're diving into, from DGS to the sociological studies on industry plants to the critiques of Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, they all just tear this myth apart. They argue that if you actually did go viral on day one without the infrastructure, it wouldn't be a blessing.
It'd be a nightmare.
It would be a nightmare.
Because you're building a skyscraper on a swamp.
Yeah.
You sink.
Precisely. You wouldn't have the repertoire to play a 60-minute set. You wouldn't have the mental toughness to handle the criticism. You wouldn't have the team to read the contracts. You would be a momentary blip, a meme, not an artist.
Right.
So we are going to spend this deep dive deconstructing what it actually takes to make it. And I have to warn you, the math looks a lot less like a lottery ticket and a lot more like a very slow, very heavy construction project.
Well, grab your hard hats, because we've got a really fascinating roadmap for this construction project. We're going to look at the 10-year rule of mastery, which, by the way, is different from the 10,000-hour rule, and we'll get into the specific mechanics of why. We're going to dig into the controversial term industry plant, a buzzword that I see in literally every comment section lately.
It's the insult of the decade.
It really is. We are going to take a forensic look at Lady Gaga's career, because everyone assumes she was an alien who landed on Earth fully formed. But the reality is much grimier and involves a lot more dive bars.
A lot more.
And finally, we're going to talk about World War II bombers.
The bombers. That is probably my favorite part of this entire stack. It explains why our brains are biologically wired to misjudge success. It's a concept called survivorship bias, and once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Okay, so let's get into the work first. I want to start with this concept from DGS Music. They outline something they call the iceberg theory. Now, usually, icebergs are a corporate cliche. Success is just the tip of the icebergs.
Yeah.
But they use it specifically regarding visible versus invisible output in the creator economy.
Right. The iceberg theory is the perfect visualization for where we are culturally. When you see a successful artist or a tech CEO or anyone at the top of their game, you are seeing the 10% that is above the water.
Sure.
That's the viral hit, the IPO, the Grammys, the sold-out stadium. But DGS argues that 90% of the work, the submerged part of the iceberg, should never see the light of day.
Should never.
Yeah.
That's the key phrase that stuck out to me. Because we live in a generation that wants to live stream the process. We have this urge to document everything. We want to show the work. But DGS is saying, don't.
They're saying that the submerged part is ugly. It's messy. It's boring. And most importantly, it's where the mistakes happen. If you live stream your practice sessions, you are inviting judgment on work that isn't finished.
Right. You're getting feedback on a sketch.
Exactly. And DGS breaks this submerged, massive block of ice down into a very specific timeline. They call it the 10-year rule. And this isn't just a random decade. They break it down into 3 distinct developmental phases that they argue you cannot skip.
Let's walk through these, because I think a lot of people feel stuck and don't realize they're just in a specific phase. They think they're failing, but they're actually just on schedule.
That's a great way to put it.
So phase 1 is imitation. They say this is roughly years 1 through 3.
Years 1 through 3, the budget version phase.
Ouch. That stings a little. The budget version, it sounds like a knockoff handbag.
It's supposed to sting. Think about it. When you start making music or writing code or painting or even starting a podcast, you don't start because you have a unique voice that the world needs to hear.
No, you start because you're a fan.
You start because you are a fan. You love the Beatles, or you love Steve Jobs, or you love Hemingway. So naturally, your first move is to mimic them.
I remember Ira Glass talking about this, the gap. You have good taste, which is why you got into the game in the first place, but your skills aren't there yet, so you just make these bad copies of things you like.
Exactly.
I look back at my early writing, and I was just doing a really poor impression of the columnists I read in the Sunday paper. I was using their cadence, their vocabulary. It wasn't me.
But that's the point. You weren't supposed to be you yet. DGS says the goal in this phase isn't to be original. The goal is to learn the tools.
Okay.
You're learning the software, the gear, the vocabulary, the sentence structure. If you try to be innovative before you know how to use the tools, you just make noise.
Yeah.
You have to spend 3 years being a bad copy
Yeah.
to understand the mechanics of the craft.
So you have to trace the lines before you can draw freehand.
Perfect analogy. It's like learning jazz. You have to learn the standards before you can improvise. If you start improvising on day one, it's just chaos.
Right.
And the problem is, in the social media age, people post their phase 1 work. They post their imitation, and then they get discouraged when people say, you sound just like X, but worse.
Well, of course you do.
Of course you do. You're in the imitation phase. That's the whole point.
Okay, so let's say you survive the copycat phase.
Hmm?
You know how to use the tools, you've got the basics down. Now you hit the middle chunk. Years 4 through 7, DGS calls this the phase of iteration.
And this is the danger zone.
This is where people quit.
This is the grind. In the imitation phase, it's actually kind of fun because everything is new. You bought the guitar, you learned the chords, you're playing Wonderwall, you're just happy to be making noise.
Right. There's progress every day.
Exactly. In the iteration phase, the novelty has worn off completely. You're releasing original work now.
Yeah.
You're playing to empty rooms, you're sending those emails to blogs or managers, and you are getting absolutely zero replies.
Crickets.
Total silence.
This is the part where the startup gurus usually say, fail fast.
Or, as Samuel Beckett said, fail better. You aren't winning yet, but your failures are becoming more sophisticated. You're refining your voice. You're figuring out what doesn't work.
Yeah.
But DGS points out a really sobering observation here. They note that most talented people quit right here, usually around year 3 or 4.
Why specifically then?
Right.
Is it just exhaustion?
It's what people call the valley of despair. It's the lack of validation, the gap between their taste and their abilities closing. They're actually getting good, but the external world hasn't noticed yet. They see that viral Tuesday myth we talked about. They look at their own 4 years of hard work with no reward, and they think, I must have failed. If I was good, it would have happened by now.
That is tragic. To quit just when you're actually starting to get good, just because the applause hasn't started yet, it's like digging for gold and stopping an inch before the vein.
It happens every single day. But if you survive that, if you keep iterating, keep tweaking the formula, keep dealing with the silence, you reach the final phase, years 8 through 10, the phase of innovation.
This is where you finally stop sounding like your heroes and start sounding like yourself.
This is where you master the rules well enough to break them. You find your own sound, and this brings us right back to that overnight success idea.
Right.
When that viral moment hits in year 10, the public thinks, wow, where did they come from? But the artist knows that the only reason they could capitalize on that moment is because of the previous 9 years of invisible work. They have the infrastructure to handle the lightning strike.
It reminds me of that quote, virality is a sprint, a career is a marathon. If you go viral in year 1, you don't have a back catalog. You don't have a brand identity. You're just a meme. And memes have a very short shelf life.
Exactly. You turn a moment into a movement by having that foundation. Without the foundation, the moment crushes you. You see this with reality TV stars often.
Oh, all the time.
They get the fame instantly, but they have no craft to sustain it, so they burn out in 18 months. They are famous for being famous, not for doing something.
Now, speaking of moments and how the public perceives them, we have to talk about the dark side of this perception. If you do pop up out of nowhere, or at least if it looks like you popped up out of nowhere, people don't just think you're lucky. In 2026, they get suspicious.
They get angry. They feel tricked.
And this brings us to one of the most contentious terms in modern music history, The industry plant.
Ah, yes, the industry plant, the ultimate insult in the digital age. It's the modern equivalent of calling someone a sellout, but it's much more specific.
For clarity, let's define it properly because I feel like people use it so loosely.
I have.
According to the Wikipedia source and the Urban Dictionary definitions we have in the stack, an industry plant is a pejorative term for an artist who presents themselves as independent, DIY, or self-made, but secretly has massive corporate backing, nepotism, or family connections fueling their rise.
The key element there is the deception. It's not just that they have help. It's that they are pretending they don't. They are planted in the indie scene by a label to build organic buzz, when actually, the fix is in. The audience feels betrayed because they thought they discovered this artist, but really they were marketed to.
The history of this term is really interesting. I always assumed it started with pop stars, but the source says it actually originated in hip-hop message boards in the early 2010s.
Right, places like Kanye Toth. Back then, the accusations were thrown at rappers like Lil Wayne or 50 Cent or Waka Flocka Flame.
Really?
Yeah. The accusation was about authenticity, claiming to be from the streets or the underground when you were actually a corporate product. It was about street cred. But, and this is a big shift, around the late 2010s, the target shifted dramatically.
It moved from rappers to indie pop, specifically young women.
It became a weapon used almost exclusively against young women who write their own songs.
Let's look at some of the accused in the dossier. Clairo seems to be the turning point for this.
Clairo is the textbook example. In 2017, she had this massive viral hit called Pretty Girl. The video was just her in her bedroom, webcam style, very lo-fi, wearing headphones, lip-syncing.
I remember that video.
It screamed DIY success. It was the ultimate Gen Z aesthetic. It felt like she was just a kid in her room.
And then the internet detectives got to work.
They found out her father was Jeff Cottrell. And he wasn't just some guy, he was a marketing executive. He was the CMO of Converse at one point. He had deep connections in the music industry.
Oh.
So the narrative shifted overnight from, look at this talented girl in her bedroom, to this was a marketing stunt orchestrated by her dad.
And it wasn't just her. Billie Eilish faced this too.
Billie Eilish, definitely. After Bury a Friend, people said her weird persona was manufactured. Then you have bands like Wet Leg or The Last Dinner Party in the UK. They show up, they have a hit, they get a good slot at a festival, and immediately the accusation is plant.
There was that pop-punk band, Tramp Stamps. Do you remember them? That felt like a real turning point in how vicious this can get.
Oh, that was brutal. They had this very polished, neon-colored riot girl aesthetic. They're singing about hating men and drinking. And people dug up their old social media where they looked completely different, very country, very clean-cut singing covers.
Wow.
The internet tore them apart because it felt calculated. It felt like a boardroom decision to pivot to pop punk because Olivia Rodrigo had made it trending again.
It felt like cosplay.
Exactly. And that feeling of inauthenticity is what drives the plant narrative.
But recently, we saw this flip, again with Oliver Anthony.
The Richmond, north of Richmond singer.
That was a fascinating case because usually it's the indie crowd accusing pop stars. But here, you had progressives suspecting this country folk singer of being a plant because his song went viral among conservatives so fast.
Right, that beat was suspicious.
They thought, this can't be organic, someone is pushing this. It shows that the term plant isn't really about music anymore. It's about suspicion. It's about not believing that anything can be popular without a conspiracy.
And we also have Forbats who rose incredibly fast with that Spotify core sound.
Wait, pause. Spotify core. What does that even mean?
It's that sound that is perfectly engineered for background listening. Smooth, vibe-based, short tracks, very polished production.
Okay, I know what you mean.
Forbats came out of nowhere with this sound, and the numbers were astronomical. People immediately said, this is an algorithm hack, this is a plant. Though, interestingly, he seems to embrace the rumor. He said he thinks it's kind of cool, like being a boogeyman.
But here's where we need to stop and think. Is this term actually useful, or is it just mean? The experts cited in the Wikipedia article seem to think it's deeply flawed.
It is flawed for a few reasons. First, as we mentioned, there is a distinct gender bias.
Yeah.
Critics from Vox, NME, and Vice have all pointed out that this weapon is disproportionately used against young women. You mentioned Phoebe Bridgers earlier in our prep.
Yes, I love this quote. Phoebe Bridgers pointed out the double standard. She said something to the effect of, every mediocre white boy band could be considered an industry plant if you looked at their connections. She specifically referenced the Strokes.
Which is a great point. The Strokes had massive advantages. Julian Casablancas' father was the founder of Elite Model Management. That is huge access.
Huge.
But when the Strokes came out, the narrative was saving rock and roll, not industry scam. When a young woman does it, the narrative is fake.
It seems like we have this compulsive skepticism, as Vox calls it, especially post-COVID. We're just angry at the machine.
That's the psychological aspect. We have become so cynical about institutions and marketing that we refuse to believe talent alone is enough. If someone succeeds, we assume there must be a conspiracy. We can't accept that maybe they just wrote a catchy song and the algorithm picked it up.
We've lost the ability to believe in magic.
So we look for the wires.
But sometimes there are advantages. Having a dad at Converse is an advantage. Let's not pretend it isn't.
Absolutely. But having an advantage doesn't mean you didn't do the work. And that is the nuance we miss. We treat it as binary. You are either a starving artist living in a box or you are a corporate puppet.
Right.
The reality is usually in the middle. Most successful people had some help and did a lot of work.
Let's test this reality. Let's look at someone who is arguably the biggest pop star of the last 20 years. Lady Gaga.
The mother monster herself.
To the general public, Lady Gaga appeared in 2008 with Just Dance. She had the lightning bolt on her face, the disco stick, the platinum hair. She seemed like she just teleported from another planet fully formed.
It felt very sudden. It felt like an invasion. She was everywhere instantly.
But we have a source here, Lady Gaga's NYC, which is a guide to the venues she played. And when you trace the timeline, it perfectly maps onto that 10-year rule we started with. It destroys the alien invasion myth.
Let's walk through it. Because before she was Lady Gaga, she is Stefani Germanotta. And she wasn't filling stadiums. She was filling... Well, she wasn't filling anything.
She was at NYU, right?
She was. She was a student at the Tisch School of the Arts. And here's a detail I love. She entered the annual talent show, Ultraviolet Live, in 2005.
Did she destroy the competition?
She came in third.
She got third place.
Oh,
Imagine being the person who beat Lady Gaga in a talent show. That is a story you tell at parties for the rest of your life.
Oh, yeah. She's got a Grammy and an Oscar, but I crushed her in '05. The judges loved my juggling act.
I beat Lady Gaga, but that's the humble beginning. She wasn't an instant winner. She then drops out of NYU to pursue music full-time, and she enters the dive bar circuit.
Yeah.
And we aren't talking about glamorous lounges. We're talking about places like the Bitter End and pianos on the Lower East Side.
The source mentions she played pianos on dead nights.
Yeah.
Sundays. The nights nobody goes out. She was doing a rock burlesque show with Lady Starlight. They were dancing on tables, lighting hairspray on fire. This is classic Phase 2 behavior from our earlier discussion. Iteration. Playing to empty rooms, trying weird things. She was figuring out the Gaga persona in real time in front of 10 people who were just there for a beer.
There's a mention of a bar called Welcome to the Johnsons.
Oh, that place is legendary for being grungy. It feels like a 1970s basement that hasn't been cleaned since the 70s. The source describes a questionable sofa and cheap beer.
Yikes.
This is where she met Luke Carl, the bartender who inspired so many of her early lyrics. She was living the life she was writing about. She was waitressing at the Cornelia Street Cafe to pay for Xerox flyers for her shows.
Waitressing to pay for flyers. That is the definition of the grind. That is the invisible work.
It is. And here is where the plant accusations would come in if she were starting today. Did she have advantages? Yes. She grew up on the Upper West Side. Her parents were successful. They now own a restaurant, Joanne Trattoria. She had access to the city. She wasn't living in a rural town with no internet.
Right. Being in NYC is a massive leg up compared to being in, say, Nebraska. You can walk to the record labels.
Huge. But she also got signed to Island Def Jam early on.
Huh.
And then got dropped.
She got fired.
Before she was famous, L.A. Reid signed her and then dropped her a few months later. He said he didn't get it.
Wow.
So even the corporate backing failed her initially. She had to go back to the grind. She had the advantage, she had the deal, and she still failed. It wasn't until 2008, roughly 3 to 4 years after she started hitting those open mics, that just dance broke.
So she fits the timeline. 2005 to 2008 is the intense grind, but she had been playing piano since she was a child. So she definitely put in her 10 years of mastery before the world saw the lightning bolt.
Exactly. When she headlined Madison Square Garden in 2010, it looked like a miracle. But the source points out that just a few years prior, in 2006, she was in the audience at Madison Square Garden watching The Killers, wondering if she would ever make it.
No way.
She closed the gap through that Phase 2 work.
It's amazing to think about her standing in the crowd, just one of thousands, looking at the stage. It really humanizes the alien persona. It makes you realize that every superstar was once just a fan in the nosebleed seats.
It does. And it suggests that while she had advantages, location, family support, she still had to survive the filter.
This idea of advantages, location, timing, family brings us to the next layer of our deep dive. We've talked about the work. We've talked about the perception of the work. Now let's talk about things you can't work for. Let's talk about the luck.
The science of luck.
We have a summary of Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers, in our stack. And this book is famous for popularizing the 10,000-hour rule.
Which connects right back to DGS Music's 10-year rule. The idea, based on research by Anders Ericsson, is that mastery requires roughly 10,000 hours of practice. If you practice 3 hours a day, that's about 10 years.
The math checks out. But our source material includes a pretty heavy critique of this rule. It calls it pop psychology and simplistic.
And that's fair, because 10,000 hours of bad practice doesn't make you an expert. It just makes you permanent in your bad habits.
Right.
If I play golf for 10,000 hours, but I hold the club wrong, I'm not Tiger Woods. I'm just a guy with back pain. The critique is that it's not just time, it's deliberate practice. But Outliers brings up something else that I find even more mind-blowing than the hours.
What's that?
It brings up birthdays.
The hockey player study. This one always messes with my head.
It's bizarre, right?
Yeah.
If you look at professional hockey players, specifically in Canada, a huge disproportionate number of them are born in January, February, and March.
And almost none in November or December.
Correct. Now, is there an astrological reason for this? Are Capricorns just better at ice skating? Is there something in the winter air? No.
It's the cutoff dates.
It's the bureaucracy of youth sports. The eligibility cutoff for age class hockey is January 1st. So if you are a 10-year-old boy born on January 1st, you are playing against a kid born on December 31st of the same year.
Right.
At age 10, a 12-month age gap is massive physically.
The January kid is bigger, stronger, more coordinated.
Yeah.
He's gone through a year more of puberty or growth spurts.
So the January kid looks more talented to the coaches. He gets picked for the elite travel team. He gets the better coach. He gets more ice time. He plays 50 games instead of 20.
So the advantage just compounds.
It compounds. By the time they were 14, he actually is better. But it started just because of his birthday.
That is the early advantage compounding over time. It wasn't talent initially. It was administrative luck.
Gladwell applies this to tech titans too. Bill Gates and Steve Jobs.
They were both born in the mid-1950s.
Right around 1955, which meant they were exactly the right age. Early 20s when the personal computer revolution hit in 1975.
The timing was perfect.
If they had been born in 1945, they would have been too old, settled in careers with families. They wouldn't have risked it all on a startup. If they were born in 1965, they would have been still in high school playing baseball. They would have missed it.
But Bill Gates had an even more specific piece of luck, didn't he? It wasn't just the year. It was the specific building he walked into.
This is the story that always gets me. Bill Gates is obviously a genius. No one disputes that. But in 1968, he attended a private school in Seattle called Lakeside. And the Mothers Club at this school used proceeds from a rummage sale to buy a computer terminal for the students.
In 1968, most colleges didn't have computer terminals.
Yeah.
That's like a high school having a particle accelerator today.
Exactly. And this wasn't just a computer. It was a timeshare terminal connected to a mainframe in downtown Seattle. This is a crucial detail.
Why?
Most programmers back then used punch screens. You'd write your code on cards, hand them to an operator, and wait 24 hours to see if it worked. It was slow. You learned slowly.
But Gates had real-time access.
Gates had the timeshare. He could type code and get an answer instantly. He was playing a video game while everyone else was sending mail. He racked up thousands of hours of coding practice before most computer science PhDs had even touched a terminal.
So when he dropped out of Harvard to start Microsoft, he wasn't just a smart kid. He was a veteran. He had his 10,000 hours already.
Because of a rummage sale. That is the invisible bullet hole of luck. If he goes to a different high school, maybe there is no Microsoft.
The source also touches on cultural legacies, specifically math. And this one is fascinating because it's linguistic. It argues that language shapes ability.
Yes, the math advantage. The source notes that the structure of the Chinese language gives children an advantage in math.
How does language affect math? I thought math was universal.
The symbols are universal, but the words we use to think about them aren't. It's about memory and logic. Chinese number words are very short. Qi, ba, ju.
Right.
You can say them faster than English numbers like 7 or 11. This allows you to hold more numbers in your working memory loop.
The working memory loop.
It's a 2-second loop in your brain. You can remember as much as you can say in 2 seconds. Because Chinese numbers are shorter, you can fit more of them into that 2 seconds. You literally have more bandwidth.
Oh, interesting. So it's literally data compression.
Exactly. And the logic is different too. In English, we have 11, 12, 13. Those words don't tell you anything about the math. They are just arbitrary words you have to memorize. Why is it 11? Who knows?
Right.
But in many Asian languages, the word for 11 is literally 10-1. The word for 24 is 2 tens 4.
The math is built into the grammar.
Yes. So by age 6, these kids already understand place value just by speaking their own language. They don't have to learn the concept of tens and units abstractly. They say it every day.
That is a huge head start.
It is.
Yeah.
And it challenges the idea that success is purely individual. Sometimes success is about when you were born, where you went to school, or even the language your parents speak.
There is one more theory in the outlier summary called the threshold theory. It says IQ matters, but only up to a point.
Right. 120. If you have an IQ of a 120, you're smart enough to do almost anything. Win a Nobel Prize, run a company. Having an IQ of 180 doesn't necessarily give you more real-world success than 120.
Really?
Yeah, once you cross the threshold of smart enough, other things matter more.
Like, what? What separates the 120 from the 180?
Practical intelligence. Knowing what to say to whom. Knowing when to speak up. Knowing how to navigate a room. This connects back to Lady Gaga. She had the voice, the talent, but she also knew how to hustle in the Lower East Side. She knew how to convince a bar owner to let her play on a Sunday. She knew how to build a network. That's practical intelligence.
So we have the grind, the 10 years. We have the luck, birthdays and rummage sales. But there's one final piece of this puzzle. And it's the reason why we are so bad at seeing the truth of success. It's why we believe the viral Tuesday myth.
The logical trap.
We're talking about survivorship bias.
Yeah.
And to explain this, we have to go back to World War II.
This is the famous story of Abraham Wald. And it's a story about looking at the data and seeing the opposite of what everyone else sees.
Picture this. It's the height of the war. The military is desperate to stop their bombers from getting shot down. They're losing too many planes. So they bring in the statistical research group. They analyze the planes that are coming back from missions.
They look at these planes and they are riddled with bullet holes. But the holes aren't random. They are concentrated. They see holes in the wings. They see holes in the tail. They see holes in the body of the plane. But the cockpit and the engines, pristine.
So the military brass looks at this data and says, okay, the wings and the tail are getting hit the most. The Germans are aiming for the wings. We need to put more armor on the wings and the tail.
Makes sense, right? Reinforce the places where you see the damage. It's intuitive.
But Abraham Wald, this brilliant statistician, stands up and says, no, that is exactly the wrong thing to do. You need to put the armor where the bullet holes aren't.
And the generals are confused. Why would we armor the places that aren't getting hit? There are no holes there.
And Wald says, because you're only looking at the planes that came back.
That is the chill-inducing realization. The planes that got hit in the cockpit, they didn't come back. The planes that got hit in the engines, they crashed in Europe. The reason that the survivors had holes in the wings was because you can take a bullet to the wing and survive. You can't take a bullet to the engine and survive.
The empty spaces were the fatal shots.
This is survivorship bias. We draw conclusions based only on the survivors, the people, or things that made it through the selection process. We completely ignore the silent evidence of those who failed.
How does this apply to our overnight success topic?
Think about the college dropout billionaire myth. We all know the story. Bill Gates dropped out, Mark Zuckerberg dropped out, Steve Jobs dropped out. So the cultural narrative becomes, college is a waste of time for geniuses. If you want to be a billionaire, drop out and start a company.
But we are looking at the survivors. We are looking at the planes that came back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We are ignoring the tens of thousands of college dropouts who started companies that failed and who are now struggling financially with no degree. We don't hear their stories because they aren't on the cover of Forbes. They're the planes that didn't return.
Right.
If you included them in the data set, dropping out looks like a terrible idea.
That is incredibly sobering. It leads to this idea that advice is a monopoly run by survivors.
It is. When a famous actor sits on a talk show couch and tells you, just never give up and follow your dreams, well, that worked for them. But what about the thousands of equally talented actors who didn't give up but still didn't make it because of bad timing or illness or just lack of luck?
You never hear from them.
We don't get their advice.
The source material has a couple of other bizarre examples of this bias. One is about cats.
The falling cats. This is a weird one. There is a veterinary study that showed cats falling from higher than 6 stories actually had fewer injuries than cats falling from lower heights.
Which sounds physically impossible. Physics should say higher fall, more damage.
The theory they came up with was fascinating. They said that after 6 stories, the cat reaches terminal velocity. At that point, the cat relaxes its body, spreads out like a flying squirrel, and absorbs the shock better.
It sounds plausible. It sounds scientific.
But then someone pointed out the survivorship bias. If a cat falls from 10 stories and dies, the owner doesn't take it to the vet, they bury it. The vet only sees the cats that survived the fall, so the data set of cats falling from high up is skewed because the dead ones are missing from the chart.
Wow, okay. That's grim, but it proves the point perfectly. We construct theories to explain success or survival without realizing we are missing half the data. And there was one about the Academy Awards.
Yes. A famous study claimed that winning an Oscar makes you live 4 years longer. It seemed to prove that success boosts your health. Maybe the validation reduces stress?
But the math was wrong.
It was immortal time bias, which is a flavor of survivorship bias. They were counting the years the actors lived before they won the Oscar as part of their survival. If you win an Oscar at age 80, you obviously survived until age 80. You can't win an Oscar if you die at 30.
Right, of course.
When they corrected the math to account for this, the advantage basically disappeared. It was something like 1 year, if that.
So, success doesn't make you immortal. Good to know.
Unfortunate, but true.
So let's try to pull all of these threads together. We started with the viral fantasy. We talked about the actual 10-year grind, the anatomy of the industry plant accusation, the role of specific luck like birth dates, and finally, this logical trap of only looking at the winners.
It's a complex picture. It's not as simple as work hard, and it's not as simple as it's all luck.
So if we look at the question, does the overnight success exist?
The answer is almost never. It is an optical illusion. It's a trick of the light caused by survivorship bias. We see the viral moment, the tip of the iceberg, and we miss the massive block of ice underneath. We miss the 10 years of imitation and iteration that DGS talked about. And crucially, we miss the graveyard of all the people who did the work but didn't have the luck, the planes that didn't come back.
And what about the industry plant? How does that fit in?
I think we need to retire the term, or at least use it with much more caution. Calling someone a plant is often just a refusal to acknowledge the invisible work, or it's a refusal to acknowledge that luck and advantage are part of the game.
Right. Was Lady Gaga a plant? No. Did she have advantages that helped her survive the filter? Yes. Both things can be true.
And that's the key takeaway for anyone listening who is trying to build a career. Don't be discouraged by the Viral Tuesday myth. If you aren't famous in year 3, that's normal. You are in the iteration phase. You are failing better.
And be careful who you take advice from.
Yes. When you listen to a survivor, a billionaire, a pop star, a CEO, ask yourself, am I looking at the bullet holes in the wings? What are the empty spaces? What are the things they aren't talking about? Because that is usually where the real danger lies.
It changes how you look at your own failures, too. It makes them feel less personal.
It does. It reminds you that you are part of a larger system.
I want to leave everyone with a thought to chew on. We've talked about 10,000 hours. We've talked about being born in January. We've talked about practical intelligence. If success is this cocktail of hard work, timing, and specific advantages, how much of your own career failures were actually just bad timing? How many invisible bullet holes did you take that you had no control over?
And conversely, how much of your success was just luck?
That is a scary question to ask in a mirror, but I think it's a healthy one.
It keeps you humble.
It certainly does. This has been The Deep Dive. Thanks for swimming through the iceberg with us.
Keep grinding.
See you next time.